Hi everyone, this is Susan, and I'm here with a brief intro to the book publishing industry. So if we look at the book publishing industry stats, and I have a lot of these individual slides from Statistica in your folder. But the interesting things that we can look at real quick are just the overall, the net revenue of the industry, just to really show you how huge it is. It's 25.82 billion. Now, in the United States, the growth has definitely been sluggish. It has grown. I think the number for this is 2018. Pretty sure IBIS put out the numbers for 2019, and I think it was at 28 billion. But they kind of look at that as being sort of a very sluggish growth. Whereas I think it really just depends on how you look at it. Like, we could look at the book publishing industry and say, oh, it's only really grown in audiobooks over the last few years, which is true. Audiobooks have been the one true area of growth. And we could look at that and just say, well, people aren't reading books, they're listening to them. And I would argue and say, we don't know that. What we actually do know is that people are consuming books in different formats. So sure, there's probably somebody who doesn't like to read who might just be listening to audiobooks. But I think that the growth in audiobooks is really more due to really the rise and popularity of podcasting has really tuned a lot of people into the pleasure of listening, right? To a show, and then you can sort of do the same thing with a book. So I think that audio in general is just really popular, and the audiobook trend is just capitalizing on that. And so I might buy or download an audiobook to listen to for a car ride. It doesn't mean I'm still not going to read. And then if we actually look at the numbers for books, so if we look, 675 million books were printed in the United States in 2018 versus 162 million ebooks. So right there, here's our spoiler alert. Guess what? Americans like to read print, and this is actually true across the world for global audiences, not just Americans. People prefer print. And this is not just older people. Millennials actually like to read, and they actually like to read books, and they also like to read magazines, but we'll talk about that next week. Generation Z also reads, and they also do read books. They don't read as many books as millennials do, or the older generations, the Generation X, which is mine, and then boomers. But they do read in print as well. So that's the big surprise is, guess what? People are reading. The book publishing industry is huge. It might not be growing at leaps and bounds, but considering the competition for media, especially from all the amazing, awesome television and movies that we have from OTTs, and that OTT stands for over the top, meaning over the top of the cable box. These are the stream, so in other words, bypassing your cable box and what's streaming directly into your TV. So that's called OTT. So it's Hulu and Netflix and Disney Plus, and there's just a million now. And we'll talk about that more next week because there's some really interesting parallels going on with, and actually some partnerships and strategic things going on between magazine publishers and OTT publishers. So it's an interesting thing to look at, but we'll look at that next week. So yeah, what our takeaway for the book publishing industry is super healthy. Okay, it's alive and well. It might not be growing at leaps and bounds, but it is growing. Ebooks definitely had more of a heyday. But that was more after kind of more during the iPad craze and, the Kindle, and then Kindle came out with better, readers. And so there was a real uptick in ebooks about, I'm going to say, about 10 years ago. And again, I think a lot of that was driven by the iPad. But I think a lot of the readers have not panned out in the same way that we thought they would. I think that if you think about it, everybody was like, oh, that's going to be the readers and iPads, and that's when we started to see a lot of like digital replicas that people were like for magazines, that people were reading on their screen readers. But the screen reader just didn't really pan out. I think it's just we kind of lost sight of that and went right to mobile. So if anybody has any knowledge on that, I think that's pretty interesting. But anyway, so you can take a look at some of these figures. There's more figures in your folder. But then I really want you to look at the Pew here. This is from 2019. The Pew is a great resource for really good research information on social media, on technology use, on reading. They really keep on top of this. And they, report that 7 in 10 U.S. adults, 72%, say they've read a book in the last 12 months. That's a lot. That's actually quite a lot of people who are reading. And you can come through here. You could say 37% say they only read print books. I think it actually could be a little bit. I think if people had more of a choice, this would be a higher number. Because when I always ask my students, I would say if I was going to give you, you're going on vacation, or I'm going to just bequeath you a book for the weekend. You can have a print or you can have an ebook. Almost everybody picks the print. So I think if we had more of a choice, we would read more in print. So I'd like you to spend a little bit of time going through here. I want you to sort of locate yourself in the statistics and then report back. And I want to just look one more thing. This was a Library Journal study. This is from 2018. This is really the most recent, biggest one that I could find. I think it's probably still pretty relevant here, but I thought it was really interesting because it was college students prefer print for long form reading. So I want you to actually look at and read the journal article too. That's in your resource folder. But this I think is very it's very telling because people say when they're reading for pleasure, almost 3/4 of them say they prefer print books. So I think that's really, really what print has become is a refuge from the digital. So 68% said they preferred print for assigned narrative reading compared with 23% who prefer ebooks. So again, we know that students use ebooks because obviously, they're convenient for a lot of reasons, but mostly because of price, right? So, ebooks are easier to get, but print books are easier to actually read. So I think that this is a pretty interesting article. And again, I'm just really curious to see where you see yourself in these statistics. Now, you guys are a little older than just the traditional, some of you, undergraduate population, but so I'm just really curious to hear, where everybody kind of falls in and sees themselves in the stats, which is why it's fun to look at stats. Okay, so so book publishing, let me just wrap this up. Book publishing, what's interesting is from a technological disruption point of view, I think that they have been thoroughly disrupted, but they're past it, and revenue-wise, they still have one thing that they sell, and that's a book. It might be an ebook, it might be an audiobook, or it might be a print book, and then it could be a print book hardcover, it could be a paperback, it could be, big print, there's lots of different formats, but a book is a book is a book, right? And so even though there was a lot of technological disruption in the book industry when the ebooks came along, they're very stable in their financial model. And that's not the case for magazines. Magazines were technologically disrupted. They're still being technologically disrupted. And their revenue models have been completely upended. So I'll be back to look at that next week. And so anyway, I hope you enjoy finding yourself as a reader in these statistics. And I hope that you feel kind of good in the world knowing that people still read. Talk to you later.